Vatican, April 22, 2025. 3:47 a.m. Paolo VI Wing, private papal residence. The silence of the early morning in Rome was broken only by the subtle sound of the fan blades on the ceiling. The Eternal City was asleep, but in Pope Francis' private wing, something unusual was happening. The head nurse, Sister Juliana, entered the room for the third time that night. The Holy Father had not responded to calls in the last few hours. She found him sitting in the armchair near the window, eyes half closed, fingers interlaced on his chest. His expression was serene, but with a trace of uneasiness. He was still breathing, but at a fragile, almost imperceptible pace. Beside him lay a notebook with a black cover, without a title, without a coat of arms. It was simple, inoffensive at first glance. Juliana, not realizing the importance of the object, covered it with a folded sheet as she settled the Pope in the chair. At 4:06 a.m., Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis, took his last breath. There was no fanfare, no immediate announcement. The corridors of the Vatican remained silent, as if they had already known. But what would come next, what this man would have left behind, would shake the foundations of the Church. And it would place Brazil at the center of an intricate web of doubts, faith, politics, and ancient secrets. 3 days later, the world reacted with sadness to the death of Francis. Newspapers from all over highlighted his career, the first South American pope, the reformer, the man of the people. But while crowds gathered in St. Peter's Square for the final tributes, behind the scenes at the Vatican another movement was taking shape. The person in charge of the Pope's personal archives, Monsignor Antonio Bellini, was authorized to organize the pontiff's belongings before they were transferred to the Apostolic Library. Among the books, letters, and devotional objects, he found the black notebook. It had no title, no signature. Only on the first page, written in Spanish with aged handwriting, "If someday disappears in silence, let this notebook be told by me. JMB." Antonio leafed through the pages. The writing was dense, reflective. It was no ordinary diary. It was a kind of belated confession. And a recurring thread ran through the pages, Brazil. Excerpt from the diary, entry dated July 23, 2023. "They don't understand. They think I'm talking about Brazil as a distant, colorful, joyful country. But it's more than that. Something I felt there, something old. The Church had lost part of its soul, and there, for an instant, I saw it again. But there was something dark too, as if faith and danger were intertwined in that land." Antonio immediately alerted the Secretariat of State. The diary was sealed, catalogued as reserved material, and transferred to an unlisted section of the Vatican Library. He would never see it again. But not everything remained in the Vatican. Bellini, suspicious, had photographed some pages with his personal cell phone before handing it over. And one of these images would end up, weeks later, in the hands of an Argentine journalist in Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires, Argentina. Café Las Violetas, Almagro neighborhood. Esteban Lara, an investigative journalist and former Vatican correspondent, was not expecting that email. It was an anonymous message with the title, El Cuaderno del Fin del Mundo, the notebook of the end of the world. Attached was a single image, a yellowed page with a sentence written in Spanish and underlined 3 times. "Brazil is not only the lung of the world, it is the hidden heart of an ancient prophecy." Francisco. Esteban reread the sentence countless times. The message didn't make sense at first glance, but something bothered him. Francisco was a careful man. He chose his words with precision. He would never use an expression like ancient prophecy by chance. That night, Esteban decided to reopen an investigation he had abandoned years before, the mysterious relationship between the Vatican and documents that disappeared during the papal visit to Brazil in 2013. What he didn't know was that by following these clues, he would put not only his career, but his life at risk. Vatican Reserved Archives Sector. April 24, 2025. Monsignor Vittorio Cassade was not a man of many words. At 67 years old, he lived practically invisible among the dark corridors of the Vatican Library. He spent his days wearing cotton gloves, caring for medieval manuscripts and forgotten parchments, documents as delicate as they were explosive. His position did not exist officially. It was known only among the highest-ranking cardinals, and he reported directly to the Secretary of State. He knew every secret corridor of the archives, every spiral staircase hidden beneath the marble columns. But what he knew most were the secrets. The morning he received the sealed folder marked "Personal Material of the Holy Father, Top Priority," Cassidy knew immediately that this was no ordinary thing. The contents were limited, but intriguing. A hand-bound notebook with about 80 handwritten pages. For letters dated between 2014 and 2025, all with Brazilian senders. A crucifix made of dark wood, with no image of Christ. Just the symbol of a circle inside a triangle. But what worried him most was a small, unsigned note, handwritten, probably by Francisco. "Vittorio, you will understand better than anyone. Keep this as if it were your last penance. If they silence me, at least let the truth remain for those who know how to look for it." Cassidy was not a man to be impressed by dramatic phrases. He had already archived documents involving political pacts, financial scandals, and even descriptions of exorcisms considered not recommended for theological analysis. But the name of Brazil, that name appearing there so many times, made him stop. It was unusual for a pope to write so much about a single country, especially in such a subjective way. Francis did not do that in his public speeches. And he had never mentioned prophecies. Flashback, 2013 meeting, Rio de Janeiro. Cassidy remembered something that the Pope himself had confided years before. In 2013, after World Youth Day, Francis had returned to the Vatican with a different concern. He had commented quietly during a private mass. "There is something in Brazil that makes me think that faith is waking up there, or falling asleep within us." At the time, Cassidy had written down that phrase, but had ignored it. Now it came back with a new weight. The content of that diary was not just personal, it was almost an attempt to record something that could not be said publicly. The covert dossier. Cassidy knew what to do. Protocol required that any such material be sealed, digitized, encrypted, and stored in 3 layers of restricted access. But he also knew that the Vatican had its own ways of hiding truths. Some documents were officially registered but never publicly catalogued. Others, more dangerous, were not even given a protocol number. They became invisible. He decided to follow a dual path. Official registration. He sealed the material as personal correspondence, conditional on superior authorization. Hidden registration. He made a copy of the diary. Just one. And he kept it in an envelope labeled Lucerna, a Latin word for lantern or hidden light. An unexpected visit. That same week, an envoy from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith showed up unannounced. The priest's name was Father Leonel Braga, a Brazilian with a restrained tone of voice and very attentive eyes for someone who claimed to be there only to review transitions of the pontificate. Cassidy did not trust him. During the conversation, Leonel asked too many questions about private documents. He insinuated that he knew about the diary's existence. When Cassidy firmly denied it, the Brazilian just smiled. And when he said goodbye, he dropped a small metal token on the table. It was the same symbol on the crucifix that came with the Pope's belongings, the circle inside the triangle. Cassidy understood the message. This was not a theological investigation. It was something much older. Something that perhaps not even the church controlled anymore. In the basement of faith. That night, Cassidy went down to the 3rd level of the library, a restricted area that not all cardinals knew about. He hid the copy of the diary inside a fake box labeled Letters from Missionaries, Africa, 1834. Before leaving, he made a final handwritten entry. "This diary is not just about the Pope. It is about a truth hidden under the cloak of faith. And Brazil, for reasons I still don't understand, is the key. If I disappear, look for Lucerna." Meanwhile, in Argentina, journalist Esteban Lara was cross-referencing data between papal visits and little-known Brazilian religious movements. He discovered that, between 2013 and 2019, Francis sent 7 unofficial emissaries to small towns in the interior of Brazil, almost all of them with a history of Marian apparitions or syncretic rituals. There was one town in common among all the reports, Barão de Capanema, in Parana. Esteban smiled. He knew where he needed to go. But someone was already watching him. The Vatican archives hide truths. But Brazil's forgotten archives bury secrets. Esteban Lara. Barão de Capanema, Parana, Brazil. April 23, 2025. The bus shook as it passed through the dirt roads, and Esteban Lara looked out the window with a mixture of uneasiness and curiosity. It was a small village with less than 7,000 inhabitants. No tourist routes. No official religious attractions. And yet, all the clues in the Pope's diary led there. The town was known only for its green hills, a small hydroelectric plant, and a centuries-old church, the Church of St. Michael the Archangel, built by Portuguese missionaries in the late 18th century. The place was not listed in any official Vatican records. But in the encrypted passages of the diary, Francis spoke of a place where angels were buried among men. And there was a date, August 13, 1799. The same year engraved on the tombstone of the church's former parish priest, Father Álvaro Lourenço, who died in circumstances that have never been clarified. Esteban was met by Irene Guimarães, a local history teacher, who had agreed to help him after an email exchange in which he mentioned a connection with the Portuguese colonial archives. She had no idea of the seriousness of what he was looking for. The parish basement. Late in the afternoon, Irene led Esteban down to the church's old sacristy. The current priest, a suspicious old man named Benedito, handed them a small, rusty key and pointed to a stone staircase hidden beneath a wooden trapdoor. "No one has been down there in decades," he said. "But you seem to know what you're looking for." In the damp basement, among the termite-eaten wooden shelves and disorganized boxes, Irene found something curious, a dark leather briefcase with faded Latin inscriptions. Inside, wrapped in thick linen, was a handwritten manuscript, in Old Portuguese, with traces of Latin and Spanish mixed in. The title on the front page chilled Esteban's blood. "Of the Spirit who will come from the south, visions, signs and agreements of the hidden faith." 1797, attributed to Friar Bernardino de São Cristóvão. The manuscript contained accounts of prophetic visions, mysterious symbols, and a letter addressed to the Brothers of the Holy See for the times when the Church will lose its light. The final signature, a triple cross surrounded by a circle, the same symbol found on the Pope's crucifix. Partial translation of the manuscript, page 11. "I saw a land where the saints will walk among the wicked, and where sacred words will be mixed with the song of the enchanted. There, heaven will seem closer. And the end of the old faith will begin with a kiss given in the shadow of the cross." Esteban and Irene were silent for minutes. The date of the manuscript coincided with reports of unusual events in the region: disappearances, persecutions, attempts at censorship, and a fire that nearly destroyed the church in 1801. "This text seems written for someone like Francisco," Esteban murmured. He knew it. He saw it. A visitor in the dark. That night, while Irene was organizing the images of the manuscript for encrypted sending to a contact at the University of Buenos Aires, Esteban went outside to get a cell phone signal. That was when he saw a figure standing in front of the church, silently watching. It was a tall man, dressed in black. His back was turned. When Esteban approached, he simply walked into the forest and disappeared without a trace. Esteban quickly returned to Irene's house. But a message was waiting for him on his laptop, sent from an anonymous address. "Stop now. What the Pope saw was not to be shared. The heart of the world is not yet ready." The hidden map. At the end of the manuscript was a rudimentary drawing, a map of the Americas with a line drawn from the Vatican to southern Brazil. In the center of the line was a Latin notation: Lux occulta, veritas transit per Brasilia. The hidden light, the truth passes through Brazil. It was more than a symbol. It was a route. Back to the Vatican. Meanwhile, in the basement of the Vatican Library, Monsignor Cassidy received an encrypted notification. Someone had tried to access a restricted file with the keyword Lucerna. The attempt failed, but the origin location was surprising: Curitiba, Paraná, Brazil. Cassidy knew what this meant. Someone had found part of the truth. And now, they were closer than ever. The Church's greatest sin was not hiding the truth. It was choosing who deserved to hear it. Father Leonel Braga. Curitiba, Paraná. April 23, 2025. Esteban no longer knew who to trust. Ever since he found the manuscript in Barão de Capanema, he felt that every step was being followed, every call monitored. The anonymous message confirmed what he already suspected. Someone in Brazil also knew the nature of the Pope's diary. And they were willing to stop him from moving forward. It was then that he decided to look for someone who had been between the lines of the investigation from the beginning. A name that appeared repeatedly in documents related to Brazil in the Vatican: Father Leonel Braga. Interestingly, Leonel was not an easy man to find, despite holding important positions within the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. However, Esteban received an unexpected clue: an email from an encrypted address, containing only 3 words and a location. If you want to understand, come. Andrada Street, 711, Santa Cruz Chapel, Curitiba. The hidden chapel. Upon arriving, Esteban came across an old building, almost in ruins, camouflaged among commercial buildings. The chapel was not in operation. The gate was unlocked. He went inside. On the deactivated altar, a candle was lit. Sitting on the last bench in the nave, with his hands crossed and his eyes turned to an image covered by a sheet, was the man he had seen in Barão de Capanema, Father Leonel. "I thought it would take longer," he said, without turning around. "The Pope trusted you, even without knowing you." Esteban remained silent, attentive to every movement. "Did you know what he wrote in his diary?" asked the journalist. "Not everything," Leonel replied, "but enough to understand that he was trying to save the soul of the Church, before the Church lost his." The secret missions. Leonel revealed that, between 2014 and 2020, he had been sent by Francis himself to Brazil on 6 different occasions. Officially, these were pastoral visits. In practice, he investigated places where prophetic signs and theological distortions were beginning to emerge at the same time. In communities in the interior, he had heard reports similar to those in the 1797 manuscript: visions of angels with dark faces, messages in extinct languages, and, more than once, the symbol of the circle in the triangle appearing in tapestries, carvings, and even in tattoos of local religious leaders. What you call prophecy, maybe it's just a memory that the Church wanted to forget. Leonel handed Esteban a leather envelope tied with a straw thread. Inside was a partial translation of a letter written by Francis, never released to the public. Unofficial letter from Pope Francis, confidential excerpt. "The faith of the South is alive, but it is untamed. It mingles with the earth, with the blood, with the forest. That is why it was rejected. That is why it was silenced. But it is older than Rome. And now I fear that it is returning, and I do not know whether it will return as hope or as judgment." The covered statue. Leonel then stood up and pulled back the altar cloth. Beneath it was a wooden statue, carved in the indigenous style but with sacred Christian forms, an androgynous figure with outstretched wings, carrying a cross in its left hand and a mirror in its right. This image appeared in dreams reported by 7 different people in the interior of Brazil. 3 of them died. The Vatican tried to take it away. "I hid it here." "What does it represent?" Esteban asked. "We don't know. But the Pope believed it was the symbol of the return. Not of Christ, but of what was erased so that Christ could be accepted in certain parts of the world." Francis's choice. Leonel said that in the last weeks of his life, Francis seemed tormented. He prayed for hours, wrote compulsively, and spoke of a final choice. Not political, not religious, spiritual. He said that the Church would have to decide between preserving tradition or freeing the truth. When his health began to fail, Francisco sent a letter to Leonel with 3 words: "Don't let him die." But he never knew if it was about the manuscript, the image, or the prophecy that Brazil was hiding. A new destination. At the end of the conversation, Esteban showed Lionel the map drawn on the 1797 manuscript. The priest, looking at it, simply nodded. "You are going to the right place. But don't go alone. And don't trust anyone who says the truth will be easy." Meanwhile, in the Vatican, Monsignor Cassidy had disappeared. His last access record to the library showed the removal of a fake box. The name of the section, Lucerna. Before the world was a world, people prayed here. And what was forgotten did not cease to exist. Rock inscription, Southern Brazil. Road to the interior of Parana. September 20th, 2026. 2 days after the encounter at the abandoned chapel, Esteban Lara and Father Leonel Braga were driving a modest car along a dirt road in the south of the state. There were no signs. No cell phone coverage. Just a coordinate marked on the old manuscript map. 25° 3341 S/52° 2618 W. They had the bare minimum. Flashlights, water, an offline notebook with copies of the documents, and the small statue, carefully wrapped. They knew that what they were looking for was not a tourist spot, nor even a space officially recognized by the church. It was something that had survived on the margins of books, in the shadow of centuries. The arrival. After a trail through dense forest, they crossed a clearing of dense vegetation until they found a rock formation that seemed to have been carved, not by nature, but by human intention. In the center of the stone, a carving, the symbol that had haunted them since the beginning, the circle within the triangle. But this time, accompanied by an inscription in ancient Tupi. Lionel translated with difficulty. The word before the word. Faith before the name. It was not a church. It was not a cave. It was a sanctuary, part natural, part constructed, hidden from civilization for more than 2 centuries. The revelation. Inside the rock formation, there was a small opening. After entering with lanterns, they discovered a narrow room, adorned with symbols painted with red and gold pigments. Many of them mixed Christian and indigenous features, and symbols that resembled ancient runes. In the center of the chamber, a stone with a rectangular cavity. An altar? A tomb? Esteban touched the stone. He felt that something was missing, and Lionel knew exactly what it was. The statue. They placed it reverently in the center of the cavity. As they did so, a subtle fit occurred, as if the image had been carved for that space. The walls of the sanctuary seemed to come alive with the light of the lantern. Pigments that were previously opaque began to shine with golden reflections. And there, on the walls, were scenes never recorded by any chronicler of the official history of the faith. Men and women praying together, without hierarchy. Children carrying symbols of wisdom. Spirits represented with non-human colors and shapes, but at peace with humans. And at the end of the corridor, the last painting. A man dressed in white, on his knees, with one hand on his chest and the other pointing to the south. It was Francisco, or someone like him. A forgotten gospel? Behind the altar was a small opening with traces of parchments destroyed by time. One of them, still partially intact, contained something surprising. Verses never seen in the canonical Gospels. Written in archaic Latin, but with a structure similar to John's. Lionel translated in a low voice. And the Lord said, "Where the voice is silenced, there it will echo louder. Where they silence me, I will speak through the children of the earth." Is this an apocryphal gospel? Esteban asked. Perhaps, Lionel replied. Or perhaps it is the first. What Francisco knew. It all made sense now. Francisco didn't just know this place. He had been here. The diary referred to a place where faith was written without pen, but with spirit. And the unofficial letter mentioned the mirror that will show what the church has forgotten to reflect. The same image on the statue that now rested on the altar of the sanctuary. He tried to warn the world. But he realized too late that the world was not ready to listen, Lionel said. The decision. Esteban wanted to record everything. Photograph it, scan it, publish it. But Lionel stopped him. If you do this now, it won't generate faith. It will generate war. There was silence between them. So what do we do? Esteban asked. We save it. We prepare it. We choose who will hear it first. The truth, needs to be revealed as a whisper, not as a shout. Esteban looked at the image on the altar. Its eyes seemed alive, as if they were waiting for something, as if they were a warning. Meanwhile, in the Vatican, a new pope was preparing to take office. At the private succession ceremony, an envelope was handed to the new pontiff. No return address. Just one handwritten word. Lucerna. Prophecy is not about the future. It is about what the present refuses to accept. Hidden fragment from the Lucerne archives. Vatican. September 21, 2026. The bells rang low, muffled, as if even the bronze knew that this conclave was different. There was no joy. There were no crowds. Only a heaviness in the hallways and a succession of forced diplomatic smiles. The new pope, Gregory XVII, was a traditionalist theologian, seen by many as a response to Francis's boldness. His appointment was orchestrated by a conservative wing that had spent years quietly stifling his predecessor's reforms. But before he donned the papal robes, Gregory had been given an envelope. A sealed envelope. With no official seal. With a single handwritten word, Lucerne. The contents of the envelope. Inside were two things. A photographic copy of the manuscript found by Esteban in the interior of Brazil. A simple note, signed by a name the new pope did not expect to see. Cardinal Francesco, confidential. If you have come this far, understand, the faith you have inherited is not all the faith there is. The South is older than Rome. And it is waking up. Gregory XVII did not react immediately. But that night, locked in the Apostolic Library, he ordered special access to the Lucerne archives, a wing that, officially, does not exist. The Lucerne archives. Only 7 living people have authorized access. The name comes from the Latin Lucerna, which means lamp or torch. And there were stored documents that were never officially recognized by the Church, prophecies, records of unapproved apparitions, contradictory gospels, and, most feared, visions of clergymen who went mad after describing them. Gregory read a passage dated 1712, written by a Portuguese missionary expelled from the order. The blood of Christ will touch virgin soil where Rome does not rule, and from there a new voice will arise, not of rebellion, but of remembrance. If this voice is silenced, the veil of the temple will not be torn, but the foundations will crumble from within. Gregory closed his eyes. Francis was not wrong. He was just in too much of a hurry. Esteban under threat. In Brazil, Esteban Lara and Leonel Braga had returned to civilization. But something was wrong. Emails had disappeared. Esteban's bank account had been frozen. And he was starting to receive encrypted messages with veiled threats. You don't understand what you found. Go back to the darkness. More than that, the Vatican had requested his extradition under the pretext of violating property and stealing sacred documents. But the Brazilian government was divided. One side saw Esteban as a traitor, the other a martyr. Leonel warned him, "They are trying to turn you into the villain before you become a prophet." The second diary. Amidst the chaos, Irene Guimarães, the history teacher, sent an urgent message. She had found, hidden in a secret compartment of the carved image, a second diary. But not from Francis. It was from Father Alvaro Lourenço, dated 1800. Translated excerpt. I saw the light come out of the stone. It spoke to me in a voice that was not my language, but I understood. It said that the time would come, and that the white man would need to ask permission to believe again. The statue's mirror. During an electrical storm, the reflected light from the statue's mirror revealed invisible inscriptions on the sanctuary wall. A spiral text that read, "What men have forgotten, the earth has preserved. And what has been buried, will return without asking permission." Esteban filmed the whole thing. And for the first time, he hesitated. What if this is not just history? What if this is the beginning of something real? Leonel responded with a deep silence. Then we are no longer dealing with faith. We are dealing with truth. The open ending. Meanwhile, in the Vatican, Gregory XVII did something unexpected. During a private mass for the cardinals, he read aloud a passage from the apocryphal gospel sent with the envelope. The Spirit of truth will come from the south, and the world will not recognize it. But those who have ears will hear beyond the liturgy, and see beyond the stained glass windows. And then he put the document away again, without commenting on anything. He did not condemn it. He did not approve it. He left it open. Last page of the second diary, 1800. The visitor who will come from the other continent will not be European. He will carry in his hands the echo of doubt, and in his eyes the light that the church buried for fear of being touched. It is not what has been revealed that scares us. It is what has always been before us and no one has dared to name. Irene Guimarães, Porto Alegre, Brazil. September 25, 2026. Esteban stared at the screen of his laptop for hours. The video was ready. 13 minutes with images of the sanctuary, the statue, the inscriptions revealed by the reflection of the mirror, and a brief reading of the two diaries. He had added a neutral narration, without accusations, only facts. Nothing sensationalist. But this was not a report. It was a testimony. Beside him, Irene and Lionel were silent. The publish button glowed like a trap. If I do this, I may never be able to walk down the street freely again. Lionel nodded. But if I don't, no one will hear those voices anymore. Esteban clicked. The video spread like wildfire. In 12 hours it had 3.9 million views. In 48 hours, it had surpassed 15 million. There was no marketing, there was no famous channel. It was the mystery itself that guided the clicks. And then the comments began. I'm from the interior of Maranhão. We have an image like this in our church. My grandmother used to talk about a faith older than Rome. I never understood. I'm crying. I don't know why. And also, this is heresy in disguise. A coup against the church. This man needs to be arrested. The world responds. The reactions came in waves. The progressive wing of the church, silent, began to move internally. The traditionalist wing, led by cardinals from Europe, demanded an urgent statement from the Vatican. Indigenous groups in various parts of South America recognized the symbols as part of ancient spiritual visions that had never been taken seriously. Alternative Christian movements adopted the statue as a symbol of an ancestral Christ. And the media finally broke its silence. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, and even Vatican channels reported on the video with the title, Mystery in Brazil. Could a lost manuscript contain the Pope's words and traces of pre-Christian faith? The return of doubt. The Vatican, under pressure, scheduled a press conference. But at the appointed time, nothing was said about the video. Only a vague statement. Faith must be guided by centuries of wisdom, not by isolated fragments of history. Gregory XVII did not show up. Anonymous sources claimed that he had isolated himself for an indefinite period. It was said that he was praying, but there were rumors that he had heard a voice, and that this voice did not speak in Latin. The visions begin. In the days following the publication, the strange reports began. People claiming to have dreams about the statue. Children speaking words in archaic Tupi. 3 people in Chile reported seeing a man in white kneeling in the forest, weeping. And, most disturbing of all, in a remote village in the Amazon, an ancient altar, never opened, was found. Inside, a statue that was a twin of the one Esteban had discovered, with a carved message. She will walk again when the word is heard again with the heart. Choice. Esteban and Lionel went into hiding. Irene returned to university, but now as a target of attacks and threats. An anonymous contact sought them out, a dissident cardinal from Italy. He summoned them to a secret meeting not in Rome, but in Lisbon, where, according to him, there was a third piece of the prophecy. Lionel hesitated. Maybe we are accelerating something that it is not our place to start. Esteban replied. Or maybe we are just returning the torch to those who took it. Last frame of the video, hidden edit. Without telling anyone, Esteban had inserted a 1-second image at the end of the video, imperceptible to the common eye. It was a dark frame with the figure of the statue and a phrase, written in Old Portuguese. Faith will return, but not by the hands of the altar. It will sprout from the ground. What the New World found, the Old tried to forget. Unregistered letter from Father Antonio Vieira, 1659. Lisbon, Portugal. September 30, 2026. The rain fell with the patience of centuries on the rooftops of Alfama. The city seemed to whisper ancient secrets among the alleys, and it was there, in a modest house with high walls and doors without signs, that Esteban Lara, Father Leonel and Irene Guimarães were received by a figure shrouded in shadows. His name was Dom Pietro Morelli. Officially retired. Unofficially, a scholar of the lost archives of the Society of Jesus. He welcomed them with wine, silence and eyes too tired to be just old age. You brought what the earth kept. Here, I will show you what the sea tried to drown. The Carmo Convent Archives. Dom Pietro led them to an old, deactivated convent, partially in ruins, which had survived the 1755 earthquake. There, under stones displaced by a small earthquake in 2012, documents that had never reached the Vatican were discovered. They were catalogued only with a symbol burned into the wood, a spiral wrapped in gold leaf. Inside a hidden safe in the crypt, Pietro revealed a codex sealed in wax. Dated 1531. Translated only once. By me. Esteban approached. The wax was cracked. Inside was something that looked like Francisco's diary, but even older, written in archaic Portuguese with terms in vulgar Latin and words in Tupi. The codex revealed. Irene read aloud, translating little by little. We arrived on a continent that already knew the sacred, but without needing an altar. Their faith was alive, made of wind and trees. When we spoke of Christ, they recognized him. But they said, he has already passed through here. The text went on to describe a vision shared by several natives upon the arrival of the Jesuits. A white man, in a simple tunic, with dirty feet, with eyes that shone like the midday sun. They called him, the one who returned. The third fragment. Among the papers was a small piece of jade, carved with the same symbol as Francisco's manuscript, the circle within the triangle. On the back, a carving, the silhouette of a tree with roots too long to be natural. This is the third piece, Leonel murmured. Brazil. Vatican. And now, Lisbon. Pietro added. 3 places where faith tried to take shape before being controlled. 3 points. 3 keys. The riddle can now be read, but the answer has not yet been said. The forces at play. Meanwhile, the world was in turmoil. A group of European bishops announced symbolic schisms, saying they would no longer recognize the Pope if he did not publicly condemn the heretics of the South. In Brazil, a wave of popular faith was being reborn, spontaneous pilgrimages to forgotten shrines, prayers in indigenous languages, and groups of young Christians founding churches of the earth, with no altar, no pulpit, just circles and sharing. The Vatican remained silent. But in internal circles, there was talk of a new council. The first since Vatican II. And a name began to circulate among journalists and religious people. The prophecy of Lucerna. An old warning. Pietro handed over a final letter, sealed with black wax. It had never been opened. It was addressed to the last pope before the return of the Word. Esteban hesitated. If we open it, we cross the line. Leonel replied. We have already crossed. Now all that remains is to know where it leads. When the seal was broken, they read in a low voice. Whoever sees the shadow on the columns of the cathedral will know that the time has come. It will not bring swords, nor dogmas, but will make the stone weep and the fire dance. The third fragment will seal the ancient voice, but only if someone dares to listen to it. Last line of the Codex, 1531. When the third fragment is revealed, a man will choose between silence and truth, and the world will choose between faith and fear. Words die. Stones do not. Inscription carved on the jade fragment. Serra da Estrela, Portugal. October 3, 2026. At the foot of the oldest mountains in the Iberian Peninsula, where the rock has stood for millennia, Pietro led the group to an ancient cave. Here, medieval monks took refuge during inquisitorial persecutions. At the back of the cave, a stone wall, too smooth. Esteban, shining his flashlight on it, saw the carving. The tree with long roots. Identical to the one in the fragment. It's here. When Irene brought the jade piece closer to the wall, a reflected beam from the flashlight hit a precise point, and something happened. The stone sucked in the light, and an invisible mechanism turned discreetly behind the rock. With a dull click, the wall moved back a few inches. And then it fell away, revealing a small chamber behind it. The interior of the chamber. In the center of the chamber, there was a granite pedestal with 3 circular cavities, the exact size of the fragments found so far. The first from Brazil. The second from the secret archives of the Vatican. The third, the jade fragment from Lisbon. Esteban fitted them in, one by one. When the third one touched the base, a sound pulse ran through the stone. A low sound, almost imperceptible, like the rumble of a land waking up. And then, words began to appear on the wall, engraved by an invisible light that burned the rock like red-hot iron. The message on the stone. Irene read with a trembling voice. Before the cross, there was the circle. Before the liturgy, there was the gesture. The voice that was silenced now speaks to those who dare to listen. Christ did not come only to Rome. He walked other lands. He spoke other languages. And was remembered by those who never wrote. Below is a final excerpt. When the 3 fragments are united, he who bears the burden of the mantle must listen. For his decision will seal not only the faith of men, but the very memory of God. Gregory XVII in retreat. Meanwhile, in the Vatican, Pope Gregory XVII remained in retreat. His closest advisors were in a panic. The collapse of the Holy See's authority seemed imminent. The media demanded answers. The people, clarity. And internally, some cardinals were beginning to demand an early resignation. But Gregory was calm. Day after day, he read the writings left by Francis. And now, with a new envelope in his hands, sent anonymously, containing the photos of the 3 fragments and the inscription from the cave. Faith has always spoken softly, he whispered. Perhaps it is time to let it scream. The choice. In the underground chamber, Pietro, Esteban, Lionel, and Irene knew they were facing something greater than religion, greater than politics. It was living memory, and it was waiting to be heard again. Lionel fell to his knees. Not in reverence, but as if accepting a call. This is not the end of a dogma. It is the beginning of a listening. Esteban turned on the camera. But he hasn't posted anything yet. If this is the last step, maybe it's better to let the world choose. Last inscription, hidden part. As Irene examined the base of the pedestal, a thin line of text, etched almost invisibly, was revealed with heat. When the stone speaks, he who denies it will die without knowing. He who accepts it will be hated by his own altar. But he who listens to it will walk with him. The world in waiting. News reports spoke of a silent phenomenon. Churches losing attendance. Others exploding with spontaneous spirituality. Communities forming without clergy. And a global wave of people claiming to feel, hear, or dream of an invisible and familiar presence. Gregory XVII called an emergency meeting. But this time, not with cardinals. With indigenous peoples of Brazil. It is not faith that should fit into temples. It is temples that should fit into faith. Anonymous voice, heard by many around the world. Vatican, Paul VI Auditorium. October 9, 2026. For the first time in the history of the Church, the opening of a papal meeting did not begin with a hymn or a reading of the scriptures. It began with the sound of a wooden flute, played by an elder of the Caxinawa people of Acre. Behind him, a circle of representatives of different ethnic groups from Latin America, Africa, Asia, and Oceania, peoples who have never been invited to councils, only catechized, colonized, converted. In the center, seated without a mitre, without a ring, without a throne, was Pope Gregory XVII, dressed in simple white, with moist eyes, and his hands on his knees. Before him, a circle. And in front of him, on a dark wooden table, the 3 fragments gathered together. The opening. The Pope spoke in a low but firm voice. Today, I do not speak as Peter. I speak as someone who was educated in silence. and I come to ask those to whom we have never listened to speak. And so, for the first time, the church heard the memory of a Guarani woman who carried chanted prayers passed down from generation to generation. The story of a Senegalese griot about a white man who healed his people 100 years before the arrival of the missionaries. The speech of a New Zealand shaman who described in detail a man of light who appeared in tribal visions at the same time that Christ is said to have lived. And then Irene was called. With Francis's diaries in her hands, she read, before the world, a passage that had never been published. If faith was born among the poor, why do its heirs live in palaces? If the truth spoke to fishermen, why can it now only be spoken by theologians? There is living faith in the bare feet of those who sing by the river. The global reaction. Broadcast live, the Council of the Forgotten divided the world. Millions were moved by the sincerity and pain revealed. Others declared that it was the end of the Church as an institution. Traditional religious groups accused Gregory XVII of paganism and doctrinal betrayal. But in cities, villages, and outskirts, something new was emerging. Small listening communities, where faith and culture danced together, without hierarchy. The final revelation of the fragments. On the last day of the meeting, the 3 fragments were put back together. Pietro had noticed that, at a certain temperature, a light would shine. They gently heated the stones. And then, on the table, a map appeared. But not a physical map. It was a spiral of words, a kind of coded prayer. Read in ancient Latin, where sound becomes seed again, their faith will flourish without altar. In the center of the spiral, just one word, Lucerna, and then silence. After the council, Gregory XVII disappeared for 7 days. No public appearances. No speeches. Just a note left to his advisors. When I return, I will no longer be Peter. But if he wills, I will still be a servant. In a clearing in Brazil, on the banks of the Rio Negro, a circle of young people, old people, children, and musicians gathers. In the center, there is no pulpit. Just an empty space so that the word can find a place to rest. Lionel is among them, but he doesn't speak. He listens. Esteban watches from afar with the camera turned off. Irene smiles, as if she sees what was once just a hypothesis become a practice. And an old woman murmurs. The stone spoke. And the heart understood. Last frame of the global broadcast. The Vatican camera ends the last broadcast with an aerial image of the empty auditorium. On the papal chair, a folded sheet of paper. The camera zooms in. On the paper, a single verse. May faith walk again. Without a throne, without a crown, without fear. Do not look for the lamp at the top of the tower. Look for the hand that lights the darkness. Anonymous, marginal quote in Francis' diary. Somewhere in Switzerland. October 13, 2026. After days of disappearance, Gregory XVII reappears, but not in Rome. He is found walking barefoot along the shores of Lake Lucerne, wrapped in a simple gray linen cloak, with no escort, no rings, no name. He is recognized by chance by a Franciscan nun, who sees him sitting under a tree, writing in a small notebook. She approaches and asks, "Your Holiness, what are you doing here?" He smiles. "I am looking for Lucerne." She answers, confused. "But, you are already in Lucerne." Gregory looks at the lake and answers, "Maybe you are. Maybe you never left." A letter left in Rome. Meanwhile, in the Vatican, a letter appears in Francisco's old room. It is addressed to Irene Guimaras. She opens it carefully, next to Esteban and Father Lionel. The handwriting is Gregorio's. The content, a confession. Lucerne is not a place. It is a return, not to the past, but to the original condition of faith. Before the empire, before the walls, before the disputes. It is the lamp that burns in each one, even when religion is extinguished. He continues, "I saw, in the eyes of those who talked in circles, a light that no dogma lights. Faith has not disappeared. It has simply been buried under layers of authority and fear. I do not renounce, but I cease to reign. If Christ came as a servant, then let me imitate him." The repercussion. The world explodes in reactions. Some celebrate Gregory XVII as the Pope of the people, the new Francis. Others call him an apostate, demanding an immediate conclave. But something curious happens. No one assumes the throne. No cardinal dares to succeed him yet. Meanwhile, circles begin to emerge on every continent. Not churches, not sects, but meetings. Simple, silent, powerful. Some in forests, others in slums. Still others inside prisons. The last words of Francis' diary. Irene returns to the final passage of the diary that had been torn out and reglued with old tape. There, Francis had written something that seemed meaningless, until now. Lucerne will be seen not with the eyes, but with the heart awake. It will have no address, but it will have direction, where love does not need to ask permission. And then, an anonymous video appears on the internet. In it, Gregory XVII appears in a clearing, surrounded by children. He tells a parable, simple, almost childish. There was a boy who built a temple of sand. One day, the tide came and took everything. The adults cried. But the boy smiled. Now I can build closer to the sea. The video ends with a sentence on the screen. Lucerne is when we let go of fear and let faith walk barefoot. Provisional epilogue, because the end has not yet come. Lionel, Irene, and Esteban continue their journey. Not as missionaries, not as promoters, but as witnesses of something that needs no proof. In a letter to her daughter, Irene writes, "You may grow up without knowing the Pope's name, but if you know how to recognize the light when it shines in someone, you will have already known Lucerne." Every prophecy ends where silence begins. Francisco, last entry somewhere between Geneva and Rome, October 15, 2026. Irene dreams. But it is no ordinary dream. She sees Francisco not in a white tunic, but with his feet dirty with earth, walking through a barren field. He carries a small notebook, the same diary, and stops in front of a door stuck in the middle of nowhere, with no walls around it. Just the door. He looks at her and whispers, "If you have come this far, you don't need to open it anymore." And then he disappears. In the real world, Irene wakes up panting. Esteban is by her side, already preparing the new route. But she holds his hand and says, "We need to go back to the Vatican." Lionel, on the other end of the call, was already expecting this. You haven't seen everything. There is one last compartment in the diary. It is not written. It is hidden. Vatican Secret Archives. October 18, 2026. With informal permission, Gregory is no longer officially Pope. Irene and Esteban are guided by a silent monk. The diary is once again handed to Irene, this time under infrared light. She flips through the pages one by one until, beneath the aged leather cover, a hidden drawing appears. A diagram. A spiral. But not just any spiral. It is identical to the one found in the 3 fragments when projected. Only with one addition, a dot marked in the center. Beside it, a single word, Sibylla. If you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment if you liked it and want the continuation. See you later.